skills for living well and wisely, virtues, and natural law. When we left off, we were looking at Frankana, who argued that virtue ethics cannot help us determine what the right thing to do is. Notice that the subtitle of Sandel's book is, What's the Right Thing to Do? Justice would seem to be about doing the right thing. So the natural conclusion is that the right, or if you're aroused, the fair, is prior to the good. If so, then questions we should be asking, whether it be of undocumented immigrants, women seeking abortions, transgendered teenagers and athletes, or the contents of a school's curriculum, would be in terms of what rights one has and which rights are more fundamental. These are thorny questions, and when framing inquiries in terms of the right, the competing answers become both clear and unresolvable. Whether you are looking at libertarians, Kant, or Rawls, what is right or fair is still a matter of dispute. Not only cannot one adjudicate between these theories that we have seen, but the theories themselves cannot resolve the questions of right. You can almost hear Bentham say, "I told you so," regarding the entire project of establishing human rights. What is right seems no more objective now than when we started. Aristotle stated things the other way around. Instead of first asking, what is the right thing, he asked, what is a good person and what is a good society? He looked first at the nature of the actor and only later at the results. To the objection that starting with the good provides no guidance to what is right, Aristotle would note that eudaimonia is the guidance, that human beings naturally strive to develop virtues, and so a virtuous society is one that encourages those qualities. Questions that surround issues of the status of women, DEI, gender identity, immigration, and so on pivot not on the right, but addressing them encourages the development of virtuous citizens. Assuming that the good is prior to the right, or more exactly, that the right depends on the good, or that human rights are a consequence of goodness, what does Catholic social teaching say about goodness? Catholic social teaching has appropriated virtue theory in the development of something called natural law. We cannot discuss natural law theory without bringing in the 13th century thinker Thomas Aquinas. We tend to think of Christian philosophy and ethics as being dominated by Aristotle. The truth of the matter is that until the 13th century, it was dominated by Plato and what has become known as Neoplatonism. Most of Aristotle's works are lost, and most that are left were lost to Western Europe until they were reintroduced by Christian Europe's contact with Islam, which managed to preserve much of what we have now. One of the main proponents of Aristotle was Thomas Aquinas, who in turn reworked it to better suit church teaching. Inevitably, the influence worked in the other direction as well. Aquinas and Aristotle fell out of favor with Protestants such as Calvin and Luther, but was still felt throughout the mid-20th century. Even today, while Catholic social teaching has developed since Vatican II, the Aristotelian structure that Aquinas employed can still be seen. Without going into too much detail, Aristotle maintained that each thing has a specific nature. Insofar as things conform to that nature, those things can be said to be good. Here we see the right as an outgrowth of the good. What Aquinas does is to affirm the teaching that we and everything else in nature is good because God created everything. Also, things rarely are fully realized from the get-go. Oak trees start out as acorns, cats as kittens, human beings as babies. That is, all things start out with a lot of unrealized potential. By nature, things strive to realize that potential. They seek out what they perceive to be good for them and avoid things that would harm them. The distinguishing feature of human beings is that we rely far more on reason than instinct. Human beings have the capacity to A, see that things around them tend to move from what they could be to what they become, B, pick out for themselves what they perceive as the fulfillment of their potential, and C, seek out the best way to go about fulfilling that potential. With Aristotle, we have talked about eudaimonia in terms of happiness or human flourishing. Since God created our natures and nature is good, happiness can be seen as the fulfillment of our natures. According to Aquinas, a just society is one that is dedicated to each person's happiness. It must be so structured so as to allow and encourage individuals to pursue the fulfillment of their natures. Aquinas also sees human beings as political animals, needing to contribute to the purpose of their society. In addition, human beings are spiritual creatures in that they are created in the image of God. As such, a society has an obligation towards the spiritual welfare of the individual. Aquinas would have had a fairly narrow idea of what this might look like, but in a pluralistic society, we should be able to expand what a spiritual animal and spiritual welfare might be. Virtues are fundamental in producing one's happiness, that is, the fulfillment of one's nature. Virtues are characteristics or habits of life that both define what we are and ought to be as human beings and allow us to fulfill our nature as rational and spiritual beings. If we see virtues as inclinations that fulfill one's nature, we also have an idea of what vices are, namely the same inclinations that are either out of proportion to their purpose or not properly subordinated to other inclinations or virtues. For instance, recklessness can be seen as fortitude without reference to either temperance or prudence. An unjust person can be seen as one who has more regard for their own good than that of others or the common good. So, virtues are characteristics, habits, or practices that allow human beings to fulfill their nature. As with all living things, human beings are not fully formed. We develop. Unlike most animals, human beings rely on reason rather than instinct to develop. Virtues can be seen as affections or inclinations that must be developed. However, being inclined to being prudent, courageous, temperate, or just does not mean that one becomes those things. Virtues require that we deliberately practice those characteristics that prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice are things that we do habitually. This also means that not every good action is a virtuous action. Just as Kant contended that not every good action is morally praiseworthy because morally praiseworthy actions must be autonomous and follow from moral law, Aquinas concluded that a good action is virtuous only if it is the result of one's habitual practice. Let us say that someone is habitually stingy. They never volunteer their time for a good cause, never contribute to charities, and are loath to lend things out. Now, say this person uncharacteristically contributes a large sum of money to a local homeless shelter. The donation is a good act, but not a virtuous one. Virtues are not one-off activities. If virtues are seen as inclinations that must be developed, Aquinas would be an advocate of the freedom of attraction. That is, the freedom of being one's best self. Consequently, a just society is one that would work to secure positive freedom. Virtues require role models and mentors. They require civic engagement. A society that encourages or requires community or national service would be seen in this context as a just society. Aquinas identified four virtues that are fundamental or basic, that is, virtues upon which others are built. These virtues are prudence, that is, practical wisdom geared towards action; fortitude, bearing up to injustice without acquiescing to it. This would involve two things: perseverance, the refusal to shrink in the face of adversity; and daring, the ability to stand up against injustice. Temperance is another virtue, that is, being able to hold one's emotions in balance with each other and reason. And finally, justice, the insight required to give each person their own due or living well with others. These are called cardinal. Cardinal comes from the Latin meaning hinge or pivot. The idea is not that these four are somehow the highest virtues, but that other virtues, say generosity, sympathy, good-naturedness, and so on, depend on or turn on these virtues. Looking back at Sandel's characterization of justice, we can see that he simply did not invent it. It has a long history. The particular twist that Wadell gives is that justice is about living well with each other. A just person is one who respects the dignity of others and is able to live in harmony with others. A just society is one that provides the means for each person to fulfill their nature or to realize their potential, which would include cultivating just persons as described above. Virtues have two characteristics. They are part of human nature and work to perfect that nature. In virtue theory, no one is naturally vicious or evil. Vices are aberrations from our true nature. A society that treats some individuals as naturally vicious or divides people into winners and losers would be itself a vicious society. A just society is one that is so structured as to allow individuals the opportunity to fulfill their nature. If this sounds a little bit like Rawls without the idea of an original position or difference principle or veil of ignorance, it should. Finally, in Aquinas' view, a just society is one that is so cohesively structured that its citizens are able to live well with each other. All right.